India had felt that diversity of races there must be and should be, whatever may be its drawback, and you can never coerce nature in your narrow limits of convenience without paying one day very dearly for it. In this, India was right. But what she failed to realize was that in human beings, differences are not like the physical barriers of mountains, fixed forever. They are fluid with life's flow. They are changing their courses and their shapes and volume. Therefore, in her caste regulations, India recognized differences but not the mutability, which is the law of life. In trying to avoid collisions, she set up boundaries of immovable walls, thus giving to her numerous races the negative benefit of peace and order, but not the positive opportunity of expansion and movement. She accepted nature where it produces diversity, but ignored it where it uses that diversity for its world game of infinite permutations and combinations. She treated life in all truth where it is manifold, but insulted it where it is ever moving. Therefore, life departed from her social system, and in its place she is worshipping with all ceremony the magnificent cage of countless compartments that she has manufactured. The same thing happened where she tried to ward off the collisions of trade interests. She associated different trades and professions with different costs. This had the effect of allaying for good the interminable jealousy and hatred of competition. The competition which breeds cruelty and makes the atmosphere thick with lies and deceptions. In this also, India laid all her emphasis upon the law of heredity, ignoring the law of mutation, and thus gradually reduced arts into crafts and genius into skill. However, what West observers fail to discern is that in her caste system, India, in all seriousness, accepted her responsibility to solve the race problem in such a manner as to avoid all friction, and yet to afford each race freedom within its boundary. Let us admit, India has not in this achieved a full measure of success, but this you must also concede that the West, being more favorably situated as to homogeneity of races, has never given her attention to this problem, and whenever confronted with it, she has tried to make it easy by ignoring it altogether. And this is the source of her anti-Asiatic agitations for depriving aliens of their right to earn their honest living on these shores. In most of your colonies, you only admit them on condition of their accepting the menial position of hewers of wood and drawers of water. Either you shut your doors against the aliens or reduce them into slavery, and this is your solution of the problem of race conflict. Whatever may be its merits, you will have to admit that it does not spring from the higher impulses of civilization, but from the lower passions of greed and hatred. You say this is human nature, and India also thought she knew human nature when she strongly barricaded her race distinctions by the fixed barriers of social gradations. But we have found out to our cost that human nature is not what it seems, but what it is in truth, which is in its infinite possibilities. And when we in our blindness insult humanity for its ragged appearance, it sheds its disguise to disclose to us that we have insulted our God. The degradation which we cast upon others in our pride or self-interest degrades our own humanity, and this is the punishment which is most terrible, because we do not detect it till it is too late. Not only in your relation with aliens, but with the different sections of your own society, you have not achieved harmony of reconciliation. the spirit of conflict and competition is allowed the full freedom of its reckless career. And because its genesis is the greed of wealth and power, it can never come to any other end but to a violent death. In India, the production of commodities was brought under the law of social adjustment. Its basis was cooperation, having for its object the perfect satisfaction of social needs. But in the West, it is guided by the impulse of competition, whose end is the gain of wealth for individuals. But the individual is like the geometrical line. It is length without breadth. It has not got the depth to be able to hold anything permanently. Therefore, its greed or gain can never come to finality. In its lengthening process of growth, it can cross other lines and cause entanglements, but will ever go on missing the ideal of completeness in its thinness of isolation. In all our physical appetites, we recognize a limit. We know that to exceed the limit is to exceed the limit of health. But has this lust for wealth and power no bounds beyond which is death's dominion? In these national carnivals of materialism, are not the Western people spending most of their vital energy in merely producing things and neglecting the creation of ideals? And can a civilization ignore the laws of moral health and go on in its endless process of inflation by gorging upon material things? Man in his social ideals naturally tries to regulate his appetites, subordinating them to the higher purpose of his nature. But in the economic world, our appetites follow no other restrictions but those of supply and demand, which can be artificially fostered, affording individual opportunities for indulgence in an endless feast of grossness. In India, our social instincts imposed restrictions upon our appetites. Maybe it went to the extreme of repression, but in the West, the spirit of economic organization with no moral purpose goads the people into the perpetual pursuit of wealth. But in the West, the spirit of economic organization with no moral purpose goads the people into the perpetual pursuit of wealth. But has this no wholesome limit? The ideals that strive to take form in social institutions have two objects. One is to regulate our passions and appetites for the harmonious development of man, and the other is to help him to cultivate disinterested love for his fellow creatures. Therefore, society is the expression of those moral and spiritual aspirations of man which belong to his higher nature. Our food is creative, it builds our body. But not so wine, which stimulates. Our social ideals create the human world, but when our mind is diverted from them to greed of power, then in that state of intoxication, we live in a world of abnormality where our strength is not health and our liberty is not freedom. Therefore, political freedom does not give us freedom when our mind is not free. An automobile does not create freedom of movement because it is a mere machine. When I myself am free, I can use the automobile for the purpose of my freedom. We must never forget in the present day that those people who have got their political freedom are not necessarily free. They are merely powerful. The passions which are unbridled in them are creating huge organizations of slavery in the disguise of freedom. Those who have made the gain of money their highest end are unconsciously selling their life and soul to rich persons or the combinations that represent money. Those who are enamored of their political power and gloat over their extension of domination over foreign races gradually surrender their own freedom and humanity to the organizations necessary for holding other peoples in slavery. In the so-called free countries, The majority of the people are not free. They are driven by the minority to a goal which is not even known to them. This becomes possible only because people do not acknowledge moral and spiritual freedom as their object. They create huge eddies with their passions, and they feel dizzily inebriated with the mere velocity of their whirling movement, taking that to be freedom. But the doom which is waiting to overtake them is as certain as death. For man's truth is moral truth, and his emancipation is in the spiritual life.